Hello everyone, and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Eric Forrester sat alone in the dimly lit Forrester living room, where crystal chandeliers had shone like distant stars, clutching a faded photograph with thin hands. The image depicted a family portrait from decades ago, with Steffi, Hope, Ridge, Brooke, and Taylor all smiling, ignorant to the storms that would eventually tear them apart. But now, everything was destroyed. The bold and the beautiful's unending narrative had reached a climax that no one, not even the patriarch, could have predicted. Taylor Hayes, the woman who had supported him through numerous betrayals, had just disclosed her hidden lover, and it wasn't Ridge Forrester. It was considerably more devastating. Eric's own grandson, Thomas Forrester. Eric's breath froze in his throat as he remembered the intense encounter from earlier that evening. Taylor's voice, which was typically poised and graceful, had cracked with genuine passion. "Eric, I can't hide it anymore. Thomas and we've been in love for months. It's real, deeper than anything I've ever felt." Ridge had burst in right then, his face a mask of rage and anguish, demanding answers. What about Eric? He'd simply frozen, the world falling around him like the delicate silk of one of his cherished creations. How can this be? Thomas, the lad he had fostered and guided, the one whose wild spirit he had attempted to subdue with lessons in family loyalty? And Taylor, the doctor who had mended his heart following Stephanie's death, is now ensnared in this illegal web. The room swirled. Eric's eyesight dimmed, not from current health concerns, but from the weight of treachery. He staggered to his window, which overlooked the Forrester estate's groomed grounds, where roses grew in stubborn beauty despite the fall frost. Memories rushed him. Nights spent designing gowns with Taylor's help, her soft laughter filling the atelier, Thomas as a youngster, tugging on his sleeve, pleading for stories about fashion empires established from nothing. Now, those memories have twisted into knives, each biting deeper. Ridge's world was falling, but what about Eric's? It obliterated everything, leaving only dust and echoes. As the clock crept past midnight, Eric slipped into his leather armchair, which Stephanie had chosen for them during their golden years. Unexpectedly and uncontrollably, tears welled up in his eyes. He had always been the unifying force, the wise elder who could mend divides with a signature and a grin. But this was not fixable. He remembered Donna, his faithful wife, who had supported him through illness struggles and corporate disputes. Will she understand? Or will this news disrupt their late-life bliss? And Liam, darling Liam, ensnared in Hope's orbit, how would this spread to the younger generation, poisoning Logan's legacy with Forrester venom? Eric's thoughts drifted back to the beginning, to a period before lovers and lies. He closed his eyes, and the drama played out in his soul like a tragic opera, a one-of-a-kind tale of grief stitched from the threads of his own life. It began not in Los Angeles, but in a little Midwestern village, where a young Eric fantasized about needles and thread. Eric Forrester was born under a harvest moon in 1945 on the dusty plains of Kansas, where the wind whispered secrets across cornfields and the sky stretched infinitely blue. His father, Harlan, a strict farmer, believed in hard work and God alone. "Dreams are for fools, boy," he'd mutter, tossing Eric a pitchfork rather than a pencil. But Eric's mother, Eliza, noticed the spark. She was a seamstress by trade, and her fingers were quick as she repaired overalls for the neighbors. She taught him to sew in the lamplight of their humble hut, starting with buttons, then hems, and finally simple flour sack garments. Eric was 8 when tragedy struck. A tornado slammed through their village, engulfing barns and people in its path. Eliza was in the fields hanging washing when the tornado hit. Eric stared from the porch, yelling her name as the wind swept her away, her white apron flapping like a ghost's flag. Harlan discovered him hours later, nestled behind her mangled body and clutching a half-finished quilt. "She's gone, son." "God's will," Harlan replied, his voice lifeless. But Eric knew better. God had not stolen her. Fate had, cruel and fickle. They buried Eliza beneath a willow tree, and Eric sewed her burial shroud himself, each seam a silent sob. Harlan hardened after that, sending Eric to an aunt in Chicago at the age of 12, unable to handle the boy's tears. Aunt Miriam was nice but poor, operating a little alteration shop in a slum. There, Eric flourished. He devoured fashion publications smuggled from newsstands, sketching gowns on scraps of paper. By the age of 16, he was designing for local debutantes, and his masterpieces were whispered about in smoky speakeasies. But delight was short. Miriam became ill with tuberculosis, her coughs ringing through the night like accusations. Eric nursed her, giving up school to work extra shifts, but the sickness won. On her deathbed, she slipped a locket into his hand, carrying Eliza's portrait, and murmured, "Make beauty from pain, Eric. It's all we have." She died before daybreak, leaving him completely alone at 18, with only $47 and a singer's sewing machine. Eric wandered the streets and caught a freight train to Los Angeles, the city of dreams. He arrived poor, sleeping in alleys, but his brilliance was evident. He was apprenticed to a bitter designer named Victor, who stole his ideas and beat him for speaking up. After Victor locked him out, Eric sat on the beach, waves crashing like his sobbing, and determined, "I'll build my own empire. No more losing what's mine." He founded Forrester Creations in a rented garage, sewing evening gowns from thrift store remnants. His first client was Caroline Spencer, a socialite whose husband had beaten her severely. Eric made her a crimson robe to conceal the injuries, and she became his muse. He believed they had fallen in love. Caroline pledged marriage, but when she realized she was infertile, shame pushed her to take drugs in the middle of the night. Eric discovered her cold in their bed, her garments soiled with tragedy's ink. He was heartbroken and poured his pain into his work. Forrester Creations thrived, and gowns adorned Hollywood celebrities. He met Stephanie Douglas at a banquet. She was a feisty lawyer's daughter with steel eyes. They married, created an empire, and had 4 children: Ridge, Thorne, Felicia, and Angela. It was a decade of happiness. Then Angela, his little angel, died at the age of 8 from an uncommon fever. Stephanie shut down, Ridge revolted, and fissures appeared. Eric sought refuge in affairs, Margot, Beth, and others, all of which served as bandages for his soul's wounds. Brooke Logan arrived like a hurricane, blonde and fearless, bearing Rick and Bridget. Taylor Hayes, Steffi and Phoebe's mother, followed suit, stylish and ethical. But losses mounted. Phoebe's car accident death, Stephanie's cancer, and his own heart attack. Eric became a hollow ruler as each death took its toll. At the age of 80, Taylor and Thomas deliver the ultimate blow. It began quietly enough, or so Eric surmised from overheard whispers. Thomas, devastated by Hope's rejection, sought therapy from Taylor. Sessions merged into confessions, and her hand on his shoulder lingered for too long. One rainy night, after a Forrester gala, they kissed in the limo. "It's wrong," Taylor whispered, but love trumped morality. Months of clandestine moments, hotel suites and after hours at the atelier, until guilt forced the admission. Eric stood up from his chair, legs shaky, and went to his studio. Fabrics cascaded like waterfalls, silks, satins, and chiffons of every shade. He chose black velvet, the color of everlasting night, and started drawing. A gown for no one, a requiem for his family. As the scissors sliced, flashbacks hit him. He remembered raising Thomas following Caroline's overdose. The 3-year-old kid was clutching to Eric's leg, crying, "Don't leave me, Grandpa." Eric had promised, "Never, Tommy. Family forever." That promise was now in ruins. Taylor, whom he had previously guarded against Brooke's barbs, was now the serpent in their garden. Dawn broke, gray and cruel. Ridge burst in, his eyes bloodshot. "Dad, it's over. Taylor's leaving me for Thomas. My son." Ridge slumped, wailing like the youngster Eric had consoled following Stephanie's escapades. Eric drew him close, but his words failed. "How can you soothe yourself when your own heart is bleeding?" Words spread like wildfire. Steffi came, furious. Mom? With Thomas? This destroys us. Hope, divided between sympathy and wrath, pulled Liam back. Eric, how do we survive this? Donna, ever loyal, put her arms around him. We'll fight, my love. But Eric saw the doubt in her eyes, another Logan Forrester relationship crumbling. That afternoon, the family gathered in the living room, a hotbed of accusations. Taylor entered, poised yet pallid, Thomas by her side, defiant. We love each other, Thomas announced. It's pure. Ridge surged, fists clenched. Steffi shrieked. Traitor. Eric stood and whispered. Enough. Silence fell. Eric's eyes, wet with age and misery, traveled over the room. I've lost so much. My mother to the wind, my aunt to sickness, Caroline to despair, Angela to fever, Phoebe to the road, Stephanie to the grave. Each time, I stitched us back. But this is the thread that snaps. Taylor was staring at him. You healed me once after Steph. Now you wound me deepest. Thomas responded. I gave you my name, my legacy. You take my heart. She began to cry. Taylor knelt. Eric, forgive? No, he replied gently. Leave. All of you. They walked out, startled. Alone again, Eric returned to his gown, finishing it as rain lashed the windows. It was stunning, form-fitting bodice, flowing train resembling spilled tears, adorned with thorns representing treachery. He hung it on a mannequin and collapsed to the floor, weeping. Days merged into weeks. Eric withdrew, frantically sketching designs for laments. Donna attempted to approach him, but he shoved her away. Even you see the cracks now. Ridge drowned in liquor, vowing revenge. Steffi rallied the company, but revenues fell dramatically. Scandals sell tabloids, not gowns. One night, Eric toured the estate, lured to the rose garden. He picked a blossom with blood-red petals and pricked his finger. Blood dripped, soaking the ground. Like my family, he remarked. Flashback. Eliza's unfinished quilt. He resolved to finish it. In his studio, he unpacked the quilt from storage, which had faded memories of his mother. He sewed for weeks, adding squares to represent Caroline's gown, Angela's doll, Phoebe's smile, and Stephanie's strength. The last square is made of shredded and ruined black silk from Taylor's bridal dress. Eric's health deteriorated as stitches were used to close wounds. Shortness of breath and chest pains. Cancer's shadow has returned. Donna discovered him collapsed, holding a quilt in her arms. The hospital lights buzzed, and physicians mumbled, terminal. Family gathered. Ridge clasped his hand. Dad, forgive Thomas. For me. Taylor sobbed. I never meant to hurt you. Thomas knelt. Grandpa, I love you. Always. Eric smiled weakly. The quilt, finish it. For Eliza. For all of us. He died at twilight, with the quilt draped over him and surrounded by fragmented loves. Forrester creations crumbled, then resurrected under Steffi's iron determination, and the scandal faded into mythology. Years later, Thomas and Taylor married secretly, the union bittersweet. Ridge found peace with Brooke and hope in Liam. But the quilt in the Forrester Museum told a particular sorrowful story. Eric's life, a tapestry of tragedy, love, and unshakable family bonds. In the end, Eric's world did not simply shatter, it transformed into eternal beauty, a garment for the ages made of sorrow's silk. The rain had been falling since daybreak, a light mist that obscured the view outside the hospital window. Emma sat silently in the chair near the bed, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixated on the regular rise and fall of the machine beside her father. Each breath he took sounded like the ocean pushing away from the shore, slow, hesitant, and unavoidable. She'd been there for 3 days now. The nurses instructed her to return home, rest, and eat something more substantial than coffee and the occasional apple. But she couldn't. Every time she stood to leave, she felt that invisible tug again, the anxiety that he would leave while she was gone, or that his last breath would come while she was elsewhere. Her father has always been a quiet man. Not distant or cold, just calm. He'd enjoyed tiny things like his garden, the fragrance of old books, and the way sunlight shone through the curtains on Sunday mornings. He wasn't a man who made huge gestures, but Emma had always known he loved her. It had been steady and silent, just like he'd usually waited in the car after school, humming along to old jazz as she grabbed her belongings. The room now smelled like disinfectant and faded flowers. Her life's only rhythm was the beeping of the cardiac monitor. She recalled the last time they spoke before he was admitted. It had been a short phone call. He'd inquired if she was eating enough and if her employment was going well. She'd been in a hurry that day, preparing a report, juggling meetings, and had said, "I'll call you tomorrow, Dad." But tomorrow didn't come as planned. He had fallen in the kitchen alone that night, and it had been hours before a neighbor found him. The physician said his body was exhausted and his heart had fought for too long. Emma had never felt more helpless. There were no words to break the quiet between them. The rain intensified that afternoon. The gloomy sky crushed against the windows, and Emma felt its weight in her chest. She stood and approached the bed. Her father's eyes were half open, pallid, and cloudy, as if he could see through her to someplace beyond. "Hey," she said softly, her voice shaking. "It's me. I'm still here." She wasn't expecting a response, but his fingers moved against the covers. It was the smallest action, yet it shattered something inside her. "I remember when I was 6, she said softly. "You made that small swing for me in the backyard. You claimed it would take me to the stars." She let out a shaky laugh. "You were correct. I believed you could make anything happen." Her throat tightened, and she rested her forehead into his hand. The skin was frigid, yet she clung to it nonetheless. Outside, thunder echoed across the sky. Storms used to frighten her. She used to hurry to his room, clutching her blanket, and he'd draw her close, murmuring that thunder was just the sky's heartbeat, nothing to worry about. She prayed the skies would cease beating entirely, because every sound reminded her of what she was about to lose. Hours passed in a flurry of murmurs and mechanical noises. The nurses came and went, changing tubes, checking vital signs, and offering hushed smiles that seemed like apologies. By dusk, the rain had stopped. The globe appeared to hold its breath. Emma stood near the window, watching the clouds split into pink and gold streaks. For a brief moment, the light reached her father's face, and she believed for a split second that he appeared serene. That night, she fell asleep in her chair. When she awoke, it was dark, and the machine by her bed was still. The quiet struck her like a physical blow. For a long time, she was unable to move. The nurses rushed in, speaking softly and efficiently, but Emma did not hear them. She stretched out, caressed his cheek, and mumbled something unintelligible. The world had become calm. The funeral was held a week later. The church smelled like lilies and dust. Emma sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap, staring at the wooden casket, which appeared too little for the man who had carried her on his shoulders. People came and went, neighbors, co-workers, and relatives she hardly recognized. They said he was nice, polite, and made everyone feel seen. She nodded, smiled slightly, and thanked them, but their words seemed distant, like echoes from another room. When everyone else had left, she remained behind. The sun shone through the stained glass, painting the floor in fragmented colors. She knelt by the casket and muttered, "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner." There was no response, but she imagined his voice calm and warm. "You were always enough, Em." That night, she returned to his home. Everything was just as he had left it. The half-read newspaper, the mug beside the sink, and the faint scent of his perfume. She moved from room to room, brushing her fingertips over the furnishings, as if touching his belongings would keep him close. In the living area, she discovered the old photo albums. She opened one and sat on the ground. There were photos of birthday parties, picnics, and their excursion to the shore. Her mother's face emerged in some of them, smiling and radiant. She died when Emma was 12. Since then, it has simply been the two of them, navigating life in quiet harmony. Emma ran her fingertips over the images until she found one that made her heart race. It was her first day of college, and her father stood alongside her with pride in his eyes. She had been eager to leave back then, to start her own life. And now she wished she could go back and assure him she had not taken anything for granted. She closed the album and pressed it to her chest. She remained within the house like a ghost for several days following. The silence was oppressive, but she could not bear to leave. Every creak of the floors and hum of the refrigerator felt like his presence was just out of sight. One afternoon, while cleaning out his study, she discovered a sealed package stashed inside a drawer. Her name was scrawled on it in his familiar, quivering handwriting. Her heartbeat quickened as she opened it. There was a letter inside. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, I'm no longer visible. But I hope you understand that I have never fully left you. You are my biggest joy, my proudest cause for living. Every day, I thank your mother for bringing you into my life. I know I wasn't always adept at communicating what you needed to hear. I've always struggled with words. But I saw you every day, your courage, kindness, and desire to create something wonderful out of the world. You convinced me that life was worth living, despite all of its losses. Don't let the weight of goodbye crush you. You carry more of me than you realize, in the way you laugh, care for others, and seek meaning in simple things. I hope the rain reminds you that it was always my favorite sound. It reminded me that the planet is still alive and forgiving. Take your time, my girl. Grief is not a mountain to climb. It's like the sea. You get better at floating with each passing day. And if you're feeling lost, just glance toward the garden. I planted something for you there, a place to start afresh. Love you always, Dad." Emma placed the letter against her chest and sobbed till her body ached. When she eventually mustered the courage to go outside, the sun was beginning to set. The garden behind the home was overgrown, full with weeds and vines. She hadn't been in it since he fell. She crouched near the old stone path and traced the soil's margins with her fingers. Under the matted grass, she noticed small green shoots breaking through the soil, new life, delicate yet persistent. She recognized what he had done. He had planted something for her, flowers that hadn't bloomed yet, waiting for her to discover them. At that point, she knew what the letter meant. Grief would not leave her. It would live beside her as a peaceful shadow. But I would love. It would grow softly, even in regions she assumed were barren. For the first time in weeks, she smiled despite her tears. She started pulling the weeds away, making room for the flowers to breathe. The air smelt like earth and recollection. As the sun fell below the horizon, the sky turned a delicate rose tint. She whispered, "I'll be okay, Dad." And in the silence that followed, she nearly heard the echo of his voice in the wind, gentle, steady, like the sound of rain falling. Weeks became months. Emma returned to her city apartment, but she still drove back to the old house every weekend. She watered the garden, trimmed the hedges, and watched as the flowers her father had planted bloomed. Forget-me-nots were pastel blue and white, delicate yet robust. Each blossom felt like a previously unsaid phrase, now voiced. Her chest discomfort gradually subsided. She learned to go about her days again, to laugh, work, and see friends. But she brought the garden with her everywhere she went.